Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today in another episode of Gyhaffin and Keoma. I hope y'all are doing well. I hope you've had a very good week. And with everything that has been happening around the world, and especially right now in the region with a volcano, and with just given the fact of the pandemic as well, because we are still in the pandemic, I really wanted to just touch base on what I believe to be very, very important, very necessary, which is mental illness. So I wanted to also make sure that I have this conversation done regularly. All right. So before I even continue, I'd like to introduce my guest, Dr. Alisa Alvis from St. Vincent. Dr. Alisa, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Hi, so nice to be with everybody this afternoon. So I am Alisa Alvis. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm living and working here in St. Vincent, where I'm from. And if anything, it might sound strange to say, but count myself fortunate to actually be home while this is happening, because I actually think I'd feel more anxious if I wasn't.
I can imagine. I can't even say I can imagine. I really cannot, because I do have friends who are from St. Vincent, and they're out of St. Vincent, and they're paranoid in thinking, what is really happening there. They're thinking of their loved ones. So I cannot say that I understand. But what I do know is, and what I would like us to just dive right into, but before I continue, let me just say hi to our viewers. I see we have right now 132 persons tuning in live. And we're streaming simultaneously across various platforms. Want to say hi to Komiko for allowing us to stream on his platform 721, and to our viewers on my personal page as well. As you all know, mental illness is so important for us to, as a conversation that we need to have, and especially since even in St. Martin, we are seeing more and more persons that walk in the streets. All right, and a lot of persons think that it's a joke, or we take it for granted. And what we see that is prevalent is in the height of disasters. In the height of disasters, more and more these cases surface, and even the ones that were present that we weren't seeing, it surfaced even more now. All right. So, Doctor, can I call you? What do I call you? Alisa?
Alisa's fine.
Okay, perfect. Alisa, what exactly is mental illness?
Well, in terms of, so when we refer to somebody as actually having a mental illness, it's not as simple as, somebody acting unusual, right? I mean, we have a variety of cultures and norms, even within the limited sphere of the region, right? So, there are some things that people do that I think get pathologized and shouldn't be. Like, people make them sound like they're illnesses when they're not. But for something to be considered a mental illness, there are a few different components required. So behavior that is outside of what would be expected or is appropriate, and that means for the situation, for the age and situation of the person, for example. That it should also involve a reduction in function. So it interferes with that person's ability to take part in the things that you would imagine them doing normally in their day-to-day life. Again, that would be dependent on age, stage, situation of the person. So their ability to go to work, to go to school, to engage in personal relationships, I think, are some of the big areas that we would look at. And then lastly, distress on the part of that person, that they are aware that something does not seem right, that something is going on with them, and it produces intense discomfort and distress, unhappiness for them. So those three things have to be met. And it's unusual, it's impairing, and it causes distress.
Mm-hmm. But what's happening, before we even dive into the state of St. Vincent right now, before COVID, and several months ago, we actually had a talk on mental illness here on Gyhaffin, and we tried to basically go back to before COVID, because life as we knew it were normal as we categorize it, but we all know that normalcy, that level of normalcy, there were also stresses there, right? Now having to transition into a pandemic that no, it's not like a hurricane season or a volcano where you know you're gauging it. It just happens one day to the next. And now we're into another disaster in a disaster.
Yes.
So for persons who transition from regular day-to-day life to the pandemic, and then now with the volcano, how would you, I don't even know how to say, what do you categorize all of this as? How do people cope with all of this?
Well, I think you're asking a really important question, and it isn't one that I think there's any one good comprehensive answer to. I think recognizing, first of all, that is the case, that we have been living in very unusual, very stressful times overarchingly, I think is the first thing. And I've been pointing that out to people on more than one occasion. And something that you just said that I think is important is like, it's not the things that we have been living through have not been time limited events. And that's what's made it even trickier and even tougher to deal with. So the pandemic, has been going on for months. We have been in this state for over a year now with, well, I don't want to say without an end in sight, but the situation keeps evolving.
Mhm.
And then here in St. Vincent, we've also had within that, we've had dengue. We had a dengue outbreak.
Oh, wow.
Which was really terrible in no small part because a lot of children died. So among the casualties from it, we actually probably at that point, at the point of when the dengue outbreak was happening, we had actually had more deaths from dengue than we had from COVID.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. And more severe illness from dengue than we had with COVID. It was, sometimes it felt like every other day you were seeing an appeal on your social media asking people to give blood for people who were in hospital with dengue and had low platelet and blood counts and things like that. So we had that, and now we've got the volcano. So it's all of these things that are long-range, long-term stressors that don't have like a beginning, middle, end in the way, say, a hurricane does, right? And that makes these situations special. And I think for everybody that I've been talking to across the past year who deals with disaster mental health, that is one of the things that has been brought up. How do you cope with something that is a chronic stressor? And then you've got, like you said, disasters within disasters.
Yeah.
And I have a few different thoughts about it. Some of them don't apply at the point that we're in right now, which is, the importance of preparedness and actually sensitizing the public about the region that we live in. Because I love the Caribbean. I'm from the Caribbean. I wouldn't choose to live anywhere else. But if we had to look at the Caribbean from the standpoint of disasters, it's an extremely hazardous place to live.
Exactly. I agree.
So it's the second most hazardous place to live after the Pacific.
I agree.
So yeah. So if
we definitely need to be prepared.
Right. So I think this is one of those places where I am very interested moving forward, in no small part because of the effects of climate change as well. Because we're going through this eruption right now. It's April. And as we try to, get back on our feet from this, depending on what happens with the degree of seismicity that we see here in St. Vincent, we will then be looking down the barrel at hurricane season.
I know, and that no one knows for sure what that will come with, because I've been hearing, there's a cost based on the volcanic activity, based on what is happening and has been happening. It can definitely trigger and be a very intense hurricane season.
Yeah. So that's something that, in terms of what we can do to reduce the ill effects on our public, at least one thing is weaving more disaster preparedness and into our daily lives so that you're not caught so off guard by things. I think that, depending on what island you live on, I've had kind of this is a casual anecdotal thing. This is not based on any sort of research. Just want to be really careful to say that. But I was discussing this with another friend, and we were saying that, you know, part of the response that we've had to certain things here in St. Vincent is because we have been remarkably lucky in terms of the types of disasters that we have experienced and the relative loss of life, loss of property, and economic impact that we've experienced. There have been disasters, in particular flooding in 2013. But in terms of a large scale national disaster of this magnitude, with thousands of people internally displaced, thousands of people potentially looking at not being able to return to their homes, we have not had recent experience with that. And it's not in my lifespan. So it just goes to show, like, when it's not on your radar, right? Yeah. Whereas I think, by contrast, the response to, let's say, even COVID, and by this, I'm not looking to skewer any sort of political administration or anything like that, but I just noted some differences in terms of, let's say, the way the Grenadian government responded to COVID. And I can't help but feel like there's some echoes of, you know, it's a response that is at least partially informed by Ivan back in 2004. It's like you've had that experience. It was less than 20 years ago. And so when something else comes up, you're automatically like, all right, this is how we activate our emergency organizations. This is what needs to happen. This is what needs to be on the radar. Who do we need to airlift? Who do we need to get out? It was very swift, as opposed to the reaction in St. Vincent, which was a lot more mellow. So it's interesting that, you know, how recent of an impact that you've had from another disaster, if that informs your reaction to one that follows.
I think people generally, I think we can be a bit naive. We can, you know, be very laid back. That's not going to hit us. You know, this is not going to hit us. And also, I believe people within leadership position over time, they become complacent as well, given the fact that, 2 years has passed. We haven't had anything. Things are flowing. We adjust to the new norms, as opposed to, hey, as you mentioned, we are living in a disaster zone, basically. We are prone to many disasters, so we should always be prepared. Our level of preparedness should be at hand at any time, right? So let me just dive in. I have a few questions now. So what is the effect of natural disasters on mental health on the affected population?
Oh my goodness. It's so wide ranging, from everything from, so I mean, the one that we are experiencing now, you think of, you know, really severe traumas that are associated with either loss of life, loss of property, being displaced. You know, that's hugely traumatic for everybody involved. You just imagine, you know, not being able to be in your own home, also not knowing whether you will ever be able to go back. Because I think that as the acute shock starts to wear off of, you know, okay, we needed to get out, you need to preserve life and limb if you lived in the red zone. Now you're sitting in a shelter and wondering, will I ever be able to go home? You know, will that part of the island be livable? And if so, when? You know, so you've got that degree of severity. But even for persons who are not directly affected by the eruption and were not displaced, loss of income, depending on what industry you're involved in. A lot of Vincentians are involved in agriculture, and this is going to have a huge impact on agriculture. So there's a trickle-down effect of stresses that come from that. I mean, as we just mentioned, we already were in a huge economic slowdown because of COVID. So now this is being overlaid on top of that. So you see that there would be effects for people coming out of things having to do with their livelihood. So even if you weren't somebody who had to move your home, maybe you're in an industry where your livelihood is affected. Vulnerable populations like children, I tend to talk about children a lot because their lives have been turned upside down and their development is being affected, right? Mm-hmm. Part of what we need to be happy and healthy and continue to grow is safety and stability. Children have huge needs for stability, and incidents like these really upset that sense of stability and routine, and can be incredibly disruptive. Stressors influence people's use of substances, and reaching for mind altering substances, not the least of which alcohol, has ties to other things: aggressive and hostile behavior, intimate partner violence, other forms of abuse. So it's all, there's ripples, and it runs through everything and everyone. And then you've got people who had pre-existing conditions. So let's say you already had a mood disorder. Let's say you are a person who was already living with depression or anxiety or more severe mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. Now you're in this hugely stressful situation that may serve to intensify your symptoms. Maybe they were well controlled, but now grappling with everything that's happening, it may cause your symptoms to intensify. So it's hard to overstate how it affects everybody. I mean, like something even as indirect as, like, we've had issues with water supply. When people don't have water, how that contributes to illness, how it contributes to their management of non-communicable diseases that they have, if they're hypertensive, if they're diabetic. Does issues in the country now affecting their access to healthcare, and then how that has a knock-on effect on their mental health. Like there's nobody escapes unscathed, basically.
I really want to dissect all what you stated.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question before I even dissect. Do you think let me just say we, I don't want to be specific with St. Vincent, but do you think we have the capacity? Do you think we have the resources to sustain, to even deal with all that has been happening and what is happening right now? We're talking about displacement. We're talking about various forms of mental illness. We're speaking about domestic violence, be it for male or for female. We're speaking about the rising of so many possible illnesses. You mentioned dengue before the volcano. There are so many things that can happen. You never know. I'm just going to be realistic. There are shelters. People are displaced. You have to look at the possibility of rape as well, because these things are possible, right? So rape, child molestation, all of these things, and I think it's a conversation we definitely need to have, because there are some things we want to shy away from. But do you really think we have the resources to sustain all of this? What is possible?
To deal with the mental health aspect of it, like the burgeoning mental health crisis that is brewing? Do we have the resources for that? So, I have a qualified answer for that. Because I actually don't think it has to be as bleak as some people may make it out to be.
Okay. Did I make it out to be bleak?
No, I think I made it out to sound bleak too when I was talking about all the awful things that can happen. So I think about mental health maybe in a way that is unusual in terms of in terms of the popular conversation. We talk a lot about mental illness. And I think maybe we need to start having conversations that are less focused on when things go wrong and more focused on how we maintain mental wellness.
Okay.
Like what do we do in service of maintaining and preserving mental health, as opposed to responding to disorders when things have already gone wrong? And if we're looking at it from a standpoint of wellness and thinking of it and thinking of mental health as a public health concern, then I actually do think that we have quite a lot of resources in terms of what we can do for each other. Thinking about things from, like, especially at that broad level that has to do with just things that everybody needs in order to be happy, healthy, well-adjusted individuals. there are community supports that people can be involved in that positively, contribute to those things, whether through faith-based organizations, non-governmental organizations, neighborhood associations, parent-teacher associations, communities within schools. So I think in terms of improving the psychological mindedness of our citizens and having that as kind of like this backdrop when we are dealing with our fellow whoever's, like whether it's somebody from your nation, somebody from your immediate community, whatever, thinking about them from the standpoint of like, okay, this is a person who might be going through things. You don't know what's going on with them. We need to treat people with a certain level of compassion, with empathy, creating safer spaces for people talking about the things that they're going through in their lives, stressors that they may be experiencing, difficulties that they're having. There's a lot of opening up of conversations I think that we can do, which will serve to address some people's symptoms who like don't have a diagnosis. Like what's going on with them is not severe enough that you would call it something clinically relevant. Like they're not sick, but there are things that they're going through and they need help with. And it would be as simple as, a connection with another person would do so much for that person, right? So I actually believe a lot in our capacity to be helpful from a community level. The question of whether or not we have sufficient capacity when we're talking about specialized mental health care. So like at the level that I'm working at the doctoral level, we have very few clinicians. That's true across the Caribbean. Just when we think about, who do we have per capita to address more severe mental health concerns, we don't have as many as we likely need. But again, the reason that some people go on to develop such severe symptoms is because we do such a poor job with the preventative side of things, with prioritizing mental health and wellness as part of overall wellness. So if we did a better job at that, we'd see less people with severe symptoms. And then persons who are working at my level would be less burdened.
I do agree with you. Before I ask a question, I will just read a comment that one of our viewers posted, and this is when you hop to wellness. She said, "I like that wellness as opposed to the bleak outlook. Gloom and doom outlook does not contribute to mental problem. With a bleak outlook, more people may die or suffer more from fear, more than a natural disaster."
Yeah. I think that there's something to be said for that. This idea that, promoting resilience, not from an unrealistic standpoint, because as I said, the Caribbean contains hazards, right? So, what can we do to support our resilience by being realistic about the challenges that we face? What are the behavioral changes that we can engage in that help support that resilience? I think that that's an incredibly important conversation that we need to have moving forward.
How receptive do you think, or based on your experience, do you see civilians are in accepting that, hey, I have a mental illness, and going a step further to actually accepting the treatment for it? Mm-hmm. Because I do know there's a stigma.
Yeah, there absolutely is. There is still stigma that we are fighting against. But I will say that over the time that I've been practicing, I have seen a reduction in some of that stigma and in people's willingness to come and seek out help. And actually, interestingly enough, I've started to have more clients who are seeing me not because they actually have they're actually carrying a diagnosis or because they're not well, but because they're just navigating a difficult part of their life. Like maybe something in their life has changed. They've moved into a new job. They've started a new academic program, a degree. they are going through some challenges in their relationship, their marriage, and they just want another voice to help them with that. I've started to have more clients that are seeking out services for that reason. And I've been really pleased to see that, because I think we really do need to decouple this idea that like, oh, a person, the only reason you would ever go and see a therapist is if you're mad. Because I think that contributes to the stigma, right? That, the only people who see therapists are crazy people.
Yes, definitely. And that is the stigma right there, because the moment someone hears that she's going to a therapist, she gotta be crazy, but he gotta be crazy.
Right.
It's definitely a stigma that we need to get rid of. And I believe one of the ways of how we can get rid of that is by having these conversations as much as possible. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think that, and also one of the things that I would love to see is with the reduction of stigma, persons who do have diagnoses and have been living with mental health symptoms, them having the ability to talk about what their lives are actually like. Because I think that people traffic in a lot of stereotypes about what those people are like, who they are. Like, this is the thing, there are people who are moving among you who have psychotic symptoms. Most people who experience psychosis, for example, are not violent people. A lot of them they're taking their medications, they're doing their jobs. They may have.
How can we recognize it?
How could you
How can you recognize it? Yeah, because I mean,
if they're being treated, you might not be able to.
Sorry,
I said if they're being treated, you might not be able to, which is
but what if they are not being treated? Because there are persons in our community, I'm pretty sure, and we may be like looking at them and we wonder, what's really wrong with this person? But how can we recognize it? And for persons who recognize it, what can persons do to assist that person?
I mean, this is the thing. There's a broad range of symptoms that we would count as psychotic, right? And I think that because it's gotten such, that word has such problematic connotations now. It's hard to help people understand, like, well, what does that actually mean? Like the basic meaning is there's a reality that you and I are currently sharing, right? Like we can look at our computer screen and agree on like a shared reality, based on what we're seeing, hearing, feeling, right? People who experience psychotic symptoms may experience things or believe things that other people do not. And they're not taking part in the same shared reality as everyone else. That's really all it is. So basically, it's possible to be quite benignly psychotic. Like, so for example, if I have a delusional belief, and let's say my delusional belief is that the water supply is poisoned and I can't drink anything that comes out of the tap. I could have a job. I could lead a fairly normal life, moving along with my bottled water, maybe, and with my therapist helping me work through situations where I become exposed to tap water. I mean, like, I'm just plucking that out of the air.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, it's possible to have symptoms that are akin to that are tied to psychosis and not be someone who is aggressive, violent, a danger to other people. You can have a job, all of those things. You could be a parent. In terms of how you might go about helping someone, if there is someone in your life who is reporting seeing or hearing things that other people do not see or hear, so things implying that they are experiencing hallucinations, or if they have strong belief of something that is irrational or untrue, you can listen to them. You can be present with them. Don't engage in the faulty belief with them. Don't argue with them about it either. But don't just go along with them for the sake of appeasing them. I wouldn't recommend that. And if you can encourage them to seek out help, like for example, if the thing that they're believing in and the fact that they can't find someone else to join them in that belief is causing them distress, saying that, like, I really hate seeing you in so much pain. And the fact that, you know, you're trying to explain this experience to me, and I'm not experiencing the same thing as you. I'm so sorry that you and I don't seem to be seeing the same thing here. Maybe it'll be helpful to speak to someone else who could maybe be helpful to you. I mean, like, you can gently try to massage that situation, but I mean, ultimately, unless somebody does something and is a danger to themselves or other people, like, you can't make someone seek treatment, right?
I would like to read out a few of the comments.
Sure.
I see I'll read it first before I leave it. So Zuri said, glad you're mentioning change. A part of the reason people seek therapy is also due to major life transformations. And I agree with that. That's exactly what we're facing right now. Ramona says, agree with people. People only see a therapist because they're crazy. Open communication and sharing about the different taboos, mental health issues at one point will break that and will open the way for people to go for therapy and or coaching. So Ramona, we're all in agreement to this. So let me just keep reading. So Suzanne said, preventative care is also not so great. How many institutions do have the necessary tools, psychologists, consultants, sufficient financial assistance, etc., to take preventative measures in order to safeguard that wellness? A better coordination between these institutions are needed, and a better tracking system is needed to keep proper track persons being provided preventative or clinical care. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Dr. Alvin.
Yeah, I'm in agreement there about, so there are barriers to people seeking the care that they want to. So even if somebody is desirous of seeing a therapist, there's questions of, does my insurance cover it? I think that's a big one that is a barrier right now. We do have some issues around the professionalism of the field and what structures are in place island to island to ensure quality control for the people who are receiving services. You know, what is there to safeguard that, you know, that practitioners are appropriately licensed, that they are in keeping with ethical guidelines, particularly those around confidentiality, which I know is a huge issue when we're working in small spaces. Is there any mechanism for sanctioning someone or holding a professional accountable in the event that they do something that countermands the ethics that we're supposed to work under? But in terms of jobs, for example, like, I don't think enough employers have this built into their thoughts about, you know, well, this is things that we need to provide for employees. Like when we're thinking about things like sick leave and maternity leave and flexibility for parents, among the things that we should be thinking about as well is, you know, do we retain a psychologist, for example? Do we have a psychologist that works in close collaboration, maybe with our HR? Is that something that we offer people in the event that you know, that they are going through something, or even in anticipation? It's like, you know, oh, there's a person who we are thinking of grooming for leadership. Can we make sure that as part of their technical training, and in concert with the technical training that they may need to move into their new role, that they're also receiving some psychotherapy or maybe some coaching that would be helpful to help them step into that role and manage it well? It's something that just needs to be on our radars more, as I said. And I'd love to see it be more part of general everyday conversation, and something really normal. It's like, I think I see it more with my friends who are in the States or in Europe, where a person will casually say, oh, you know, I ran this by my therapist and they said blah, blah, blah. You know, we're not quite there yet in the Caribbean where you get somebody being like, well, I asked my therapist about it and they said, I'd love to.
We're definitely not there as yet. And I I think part of the pressure as well, and I'm pretty sure so many would agree with me, part of the pressure is that we are such a small community. We
Mm-hmm.
the islands are small, and the thing is, even though there are so many islands within the region, we know someone who lives in every island more than likely. So the word of you're crazy getting around, or you're even seeing a therapist, it really, really resonates. So persons, they shun themselves. And the thing is also, we are a society that is very secretive. We
Mm-hmm.
only can't talk about that. That is something that you should never talk about. So all of that adds additional pressure, in my perspective, in my opinion, to all of what people are already coping with. They're afraid to come out. People are willing to come out to talk, but they're afraid to actually make that move to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do this. But I mean, again, we really need to have this conversation more. So Zuri said there should be a cutoff point in terms of age, and also think some kids handle certain news better than others. So it would be a matter of gauging who your child is and how well they would respond to certain information. Some children do suffer from anxiety disorders.
I think that comment came on the heels of someone indicating in the comments that you should talk to your children about what's going on. I think that, yes, have some sensitivity around like who your child is. And at the same token, if you do have a child who's particularly anxious, information is helpful to an anxious person, not harmful. So trying to buffer a child who is anxious from the reality that life is happening probably won't do them favors. And by the way, this is not me espousing some sort of tough love stance and being like, oh, you have to expose them to the world. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you will not be able to protect them from everything forever.
Mm-hmm.
So if your child is really problematically anxious and exhibits multiple signs of having a really low ceiling for anything out of the ordinary, let's say you have a child who really struggles with being separated from you, who really has trouble adjusting and kind of getting rebalanced when things change. If you've noticed that it makes them particularly distressed and they seem to have a hard time getting their equilibrium back, that might be a good time to seek out a professional who's versed in working with very anxious children, because that might signal something that is out of the ordinary and goes beyond, just, oh, my kid has a bit of a worried flavor to them. Some kids are just a little worried, right? But in general, I would say being transparent with children is best within the boundaries of what's developmentally appropriate. So obviously, if my child is 4, I'm not going to talk to them right now about, the intricacies of the movement of tectonic plates and what we might expect to happen with this volcano. What I'm going to do with a child that small is tell them as much as they can understand about, oh, this is what happens when a volcano erupts. These are the things that are being done to keep you safe. Mm-hmm. Here's what mommy and daddy are doing to keep you safe, or whatever your role is as a guardian in the child's life, and reassuring them that even though we are not certain about everything, being honest about like, well, mommy doesn't have answers to everything, but here's what I do know. I do know that I will protect you. I know that I love you very much, and I am here. Like you can even reassure a very small child of those things and encourage them to express their questions and worries that they may have, because kids worry about all sorts of things because they're little people are trying to figure out the world, right? So probing them to find out what their questions are, I think, is really important, and helping them with any misinformation that they may have absorbed. I think that that's part of the reason that's important to have open conversation, because, they're picking up little snippets of information from all about, from media, from their friends or whatever. And they may have put together a story in their head that is serving to make them more anxious. So as the adult in their life, you're responsible for being like, wait a minute, like, tell me what you think is happening here. And, debunking things where you need to.
Yeah, I definitely think a conversation between parents and children needs to happen continuously. And I believe parents also needs to pay attention to their children, because children, not every child speaks, but they
Mhm.
display a certain level of behavioral pattern change. So it's we definitely have to pay attention to that. So another, we're having some questions. What is the average amount of clients that a therapist in your institution can accept to give the proper care that is needed?
Whew. Well, so first thing that I would say is that I don't work full time in doing private practice work. So I work at my academic job during the day, and then I do private practice work on evenings and weekends. And as part of being a reflective practitioner, like even if I were working full time, there would absolutely be a limit to what my active caseload could be. um, Not only for the protection of my clients, but for the protection of me. Because you can't pour from an empty cup. If you get to a place where you are kind of scraping the barrel in terms of your own resources, and you're not getting appropriate time for rest and replenishment, then you're going to start, even with good intentions, you are going to start having an ill effect on your clients. So in the case of me doing part-time work, I try not to go over more than about 15 clients per week. It's difficult for me to do more than that, working part-time. If I were working full-time, I think it would be really difficult for me to consider seeing more than 5 people in a day, because you have to remember, like, a full appointment. So this is me talking about full psychotherapy appointments. I'm not talking about shorter appointments that may have to do with a wellness check or something like this. I'm talking about a full appointment that's 50 minutes long. It's really hard for me to see doing more than 5 in a day, because of just the preparation for each session, the notes that are associated, the notes and records that are associated with that patient, and making sure all the documentation is correct, and also having enough time to kind of rest and regroup between sessions. Um, when mental health workers are overburdened, it does not work out well for anybody. It's the same as, like, trying to make doctors and nurses work insane hours. We get tired like everybody else.
And do you have a therapist?
Right now, I should. What I do have is some very trusted individuals who are also in my field that I can debrief things with, and that I can even do case consults with, and that's really helpful. It's not ideal. I am currently in need of a therapist. One of the things that can be challenging is finding a therapist who is versed in working with therapists. So that's the thing.
It sounds like
I
a
don't.
needle in a haystack.
Pardon me.
That sounds like a needle in a haystack.
There are people who particularly do that kind of work. I mean, the other thing is too, like, where are they? Is it in a price range that I can afford? Are they a person who comes from a background such that they will understand me? I'm a Black woman. I'm a West Indian woman. Are you coming from an anti-racist, post-colonial framework? Like, can you do all of those things while you're talking to me? So it is kind of niche, the kind of person that I would need as my therapist. If anybody out there want to be my therapist and you feel like you fit the bill, please reach out to me. But I don't have one right now.
We have two that I engage with here in St. Martin. Tashina, Martin Thomas, exceptional. Zoya Hyman, exceptional as well. They were guests on Gyhaffin before, definitely. So maybe you never know. On another
Maybe.
episode, we all connecting. We just have a whole platform of therapists, psychiatrists on one platform.
Yeah,
So
man.
Elizabeth Augusta said, our community needs to be educated that your mental health should also be a priority, just as your general health is addressed. Our mind gets sick just like other parts of our body. We need to bring awareness and stop the stigma. I do agree with you.
Mhm.
I think that speaks for itself. It really
It
does.
absolutely does. I think we pay lip service to
Yeah.
mental health in a lot of cases. People will say, "Oh yes, I'm thinking about your mental health." I'm like, no, you're not.
in terms of mental health, there is so much more that has to be done, especially in the workplace, because when your boss hears, oh, you have a you have a mental illness therapist, they automatically think that some persons will automatically think that you're no longer fit for the job. They will find all kind of reasons. Oh, she's always sick. She's this. She's that. You're putting pressure on the workforce. We're already short staffed. So there must be some kind of regulations, some kind of legal regulations in place that protect. And also at the same time, there are persons who will abuse that system as well. They, okay, I'm sick. So there must be some kind of balance in protecting the employer and the.
Yeah, I think that those can be tough needles to thread, but ones that we must try to, right? That there has to be some accounting for the fact that people need to be able to access care if they need it. But I think I'm probably going to sound like a broken record. So much of these things come back down to prevention. When somebody sets up a business and they write their employee handbook, how much of their policies are grounded in the idea of like, what do people need psychologically? Like when you think about, how you've written your sick leave policies or your personal day policies, like, are we thinking about it from the standpoint of like, oh, if I need a mental health day, can I take one? And will it impact me in terms of how I get appraised at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year, right? So having policies in place that are in support of people's mental health and aren't punitive from the start, I think is really important. So it's like you're fostering a workplace that supports mental health. So you have less people burning out, breaking down on you. You want to do the work at the front end. I think that's what I would love to see a lot more of. I see a comment here that somebody was saying that having a list of therapists available per island would be useful. So many people have talked about developing directories, and there are places where there's been more work done on that than others. I would say probably the places where I've seen the most work done on that so far is Trinidad. And there's a really great, I don't know what to call them, whether to call them a foundation or they're called Mindwise TT. And they have worked to develop a directory, but also they contribute to another effort called Find Care TT that has to do with teletherapy. So there have been people who are responding to this desire from some people to be connected with a therapist, but they need low cost or no cost options, or they also want to be connected with a professional who's not in the island that they live in. So there's been kind of that exchange going on. And there is some of that accessible through Find Care TT. And I think the other body that I'm aware of, or effort that I'm aware of, is one called Caricope, which is again low cost or no cost teletherapy, where you can be connected with somebody in another island.
Okay. I think that information is very necessary, very, very necessary. So someone said, Suzanne, said one of the biggest issues facing the island is the increase of those who clearly need help but are not receiving it because he or she doesn't want to be treated, and we leave such persons alone, start to fend for themselves, then that help is clearly needed. When that help is clearly needed, a concerned family member can go to court and request that person is placed under the custodian, under accurate selling. Okay, that's Dutch. It is the first step to having someone take on the responsibility of their care.
Because that would be dependent on the laws of where you live and what the policies are in terms of the Mental Health Act that is in your country. The laws and policies pertaining to things like involuntary commitment and things of that nature, or having somebody having somebody, placed under your custodial care because they are seen as not being mentally fit to make decisions for themselves. The only thing that I would say in cases like that, and if somebody has a family member and that's one of the things that they are considering, is also knowing that like that people who are experiencing severe psychiatric symptoms, for example, they need interaction. They need companionship. They don't just need those things, they deserve those things as people. They deserve love. They deserve to have lives that feel fulfilling. They deserve more than to simply be drugged and controlled, basically. And I think that we do have an attitude in the Caribbean that more around severe mental illness in particular, that focuses more on containment, and less about, how can this person live a life that is meaningful? How can they have all of the things that other people want in terms of, meaningful relationships, being employed, or using their time in a fulfilling and meaningful way to them? Like, they need those things too. So in the midst of thinking about, okay, how do we help people who are really suffering, also thinking about how do we make them part of our society? How do we not make them into a pariah class? Because up until this point, I think that is what we have done.
We're talking about community responsiveness right now, right? How do our community members respond to, or family members respond to persons who are displaying a certain level of mental illness? So there is something that has been bothering me here in St. Martin. There is someone within our community that is very well known in the media spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. And we're quick to pull out our phones and record people. When you see them walking the streets or so, let me record this person. So I think it was 2 weeks ago, this particular person, and persons in St. Martin will know exactly who I'm speaking about, but honestly, this thing has ticked me the hell off, right? In the sense of, here it is, this particular person is walking the streets, and persons find it so cute. I have no clue what else what other word to use. Find it so cute, so comfortable to ask, why are you taking drugs, or why are you this, or why are you that? Like why are you taking cocaine, or how long have you been doing it? What is your point in asking that question? And I can tell you, for me, this is the first time I'm ever speaking about it publicly, because I'm very, very very isolated with my opinion sometimes. But honestly, when I saw it, it pissed me off, because what is your point? If you see someone in the community, whether if the person is known or not known, there are so many, if you really care, there are so many ways that you can say, hey, let me help you. Right. But to go and put a video camera to that person's face, knowing their current state, we all see the person's state, and question them and then circulate it.
No.
So what would be your reaction to something like that?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think it's awful. I mean, if somebody goes through something, whatever it is, whether it was a change of fortune or a trauma that leads them to have like basically an acute stress reaction, and then finds them, on the street. I can't think of anything more despicable than to go and film that person in their reduced state, not affording them any sort of dignity, with no regard for their humanity, nothing, and sensationalize that, just kind of making this person, treating them like a caricature rather than an actual person. Like, that's disgusting.
I agree. I definitely agree, and it's just become a trend. I mean, I understand people record things and who have the most likes or whatever person's reasons are, but it really disturbed me when I saw that. It really did, And when it comes to me, I just don't share it. I don't engage. It just really pisses me off, because what is your point? If you really want to help somebody, You will ask specific questions. Do you would like to have something to eat? Have you
Right.
eaten? And we don't need to know that you ask that question. You know, calling somebody, maybe like a relative of theirs or someone you believe may know them, to come and get them wherever you see them. But that, it really pissed me off, and I really wanted to bring it here to ask you, you know, how should we really respond when we see this? How do we become a community of empathy that display a level of empathy for our own people, or people we don't even know?
Well, I think that a part of what we can do, just like how, you know, when we talk about cultivating conversations where people can be upstanders about things like sexism or gender-based violence or racism. It's the same type of thing when people crack their casual jokes about somebody, you know, being crazy or chipping off or whatever your particular nation's slang is around these things, and making light of somebody being in distress or in psychic pain, letting people know that's not funny.
Yeah.
That is not the substance of a joke. That is not funny. You know, there are people who crack wise around things like suicide, you know, being like, that is not funny. There's nothing funny about that. And starting to shift our consciousness and our conversations about this, so that people start to make that shift toward thinking, oh, there's a person behind all of that. Right? You know.
I think with all of the stress that we're facing, we don't need that. You know, we need to become even more unified, because there are so many times when you see people on the street walking or looking nice or looking distressed or whatever it is. Everyone is dealing with something, and you have absolutely no clue what that person is dealing with. And you have basically 1 second or 1 millisecond to either say something good or say something that triggers that person. It all depends on what you say. You can actually make that person jump off the cliff, or you can pull them off from jumping.
Absolutely.
Metaphorically, all right? So we definitely have to become even more conscious of the choices. Not everything is a joke.
Yeah.
People's lives we're talking about. So Alisa said, government will need to get cracking on this soon. Scientists are predicting an unusually high hurricane season approaching on the heels of this pandemic and recent volcanic eruption. This is a lot of people to deal with. Haven't quite recovered fully from one thing, and hearing this can put you in a really bad headspace. Recently, I had to stop looking at the prediction news and start looking at funny videos as a way to have more positive outlook. Therapy session as an addition, I guess that's what it is.
I think so. No, she makes a great point, because I mean, and it was something that, we did a Twitter space yesterday, focusing on mental health and how people can cope in the midst of a pandemic and an eruption. And one of the persons co-hosting the space with me, a colleague of mine named Kimberly Cambridge, she was talking about how her best friend was telling her, you know, stop doom scrolling. You know, you get into any one of these apps, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you may start just kind of scrolling. And the more you scroll, the more you're absorbing of like bad news or things that are supposed to happen, or predictions about things, and it makes you feel just that much more overwhelmed, and it makes you feel out of control. Right? Because there's no one who can definitively tell you what's going to happen next. So I absolutely think per Alicia's commentary, put down the phone. You know, think about what you ingest during the day in terms of your social media. Maybe you need to go on a bit of a social media diet. And even a network news diet. You know, maybe be like, you know what, I watch news once a day. I try to get critical updates, and after that, I'm off of that, because it's too much to be taking in all day long. And thinking about staying within the realm of what you can control. What is within the zone of things that you actually have control over, and doing that. But I think Alicia also mentioned distraction, and distraction is not necessarily a bad thing. It's one of the things that should be in your toolkit for addressing anxiety. Sometimes we need to be distracted, and we need a healthy distraction, whether it's something that makes us laugh, something that makes us think, something that we find inspiring. You know, being mentally engaged by something else for a short amount of time to help reduce our anxiety is perfectly fine.
Let me read this question I wrote. Beside the stress of the uncertainty, there is also the stress of living uncomfortable. And I know we touched base on this already, but I'll still read it out. There's also the stress of living in uncomfortable positions, of having to flee from their homes, live in shelters, for many others to be evacuated to other islands. What are the effects of this mentally for persons? Because it's one thing to be uprooted from the only place that feels like home to you. And now you're in a shelter where you're basically sharing this wide open space with so many people who more than likely are strangers or acquaintances, or hi, how are you doing? And there are some persons who literally are uprooted and they're in another country. And then for those persons, the reality that they worked for so many years to mind their cattle, plant their farms, and to build their homes, the possibility of losing all of that and they're out of their country. How do they function?
I think there's a word that somebody brought up. It started coming up probably within the first 3 months of the pandemic. And I think we probably need to use it more often as a way of conceptualizing what is happening and what happens in situations like this. I think that for people who find themselves in that situation wherein they may end up first internally displaced and then subsequently in an entirely separate country, and then having to grapple with all of the losses that they've experienced, what they will do is they'll grieve. Grief is what it will be, right? Separate and apart from any other way of thinking about trauma. Grief, deep, abiding, long-standing, and likely complicated grief. Because I'm thinking of a situation wherein, because we don't know how long the activity will continue. In terms of the volcano, we don't know whether the seismicity will die down within a matter of weeks or whether it will go on for months. Both things are possible. Soufriere Hills is still erupting 26 years later, right? So it may be a situation, and I guess imagining this of, you built up a life for yourself, you had a home, you had livelihood. Let's say you were somebody engaged in agriculture, you had your animals, your lands, what you were accustomed to doing, and you're forcibly pulled out of that. And you maybe end up, setting up a life in another nearby island and not being able to go back home, and that sensation of home being so close but yet so far. What does that do to a person over time? I actually have some plans this week to touch base with a clinician out of Montserrat to talk to her a bit about the effects on people from there, on diasporic Montserratians, and what lessons there are to be learned from the things that those people experienced, having to just pick up and leave their lives, right? I think there's no way to overstate what the possible effects could be, especially depending on what situation you go and meet in the island that you go to. Like, how much support are you given? What resources are available to you with respect to resettlement? What skills do you have in terms of trying to seek livelihood in a new place? Because that's not going to be consistent from person to person. Some people are going to have skills and abilities that are marketable in the place that they end up, and some people won't, right? So it's a tough question.
It's
very tough.
It's a tough question, and it's an even harder reality because it just sounds so I don't want to say nice when we say it. It's easier for us to say it, of course, but I'm just trying to put myself in the space of that person. Let's say that 50-year-old or that 55-year-old or even 45-year-old who's worked for 20, 30, 40 years of their life, and they accumulated this amount, this level of comfort. And of course, there's no one to be blamed, but
Mhm.
how do they find themselves now in another country to start over? And given the fact that there is a pandemic before the volcano showed up, a whole year before that, persons were out of work.
Mhm.
Persons weren't earning. People were already scratching their heads like, oh my God, how am I going to make it? And
Yeah.
then now it's like we're sinking even more. And then
Mhm.
the whole thought of, because I saw the professor stated there's a possibility that this can go on for about a year. The
It
whole
can.
thoughts of, oh my God, happening for a year. I can't lie. When I heard certain things, like, okay, I wonder who's going to really die when this thing happens. Oh, the people who you know, the people you don't know. We are human beings and we will have those thoughts. So
Mm.
how do we calm our minds
Mhm.
and try our best to focus on now, even though it's impossible, nearly impossible to focus on what if. But
Mhm.
how do we remain present and how do we remain hopeful in
Mhm.
all of this? How?
Yeah. I think there's a few different things that came to mind as you were speaking. I suppose for persons for whom their faith is an important pillar of their lives, that's going to be very, very important. And if you're a part of, if you're listening to this and you are a part of a faith-based organization, or you're part of a church community and you are somewhere that's going to be receiving evacuees, really recognizing how it's important to create like that web of community to these people who may be coming in feeling like I have nothing, I have no one. I think the sense of isolation, as much as we can do to reduce that feeling for people who have been so brutally uprooted, I think that's the first and most important thing. Like that you feel wrapped and cared for by people who are around you, that you feel a sense of belongingness is a really powerful thing. It can help people feel as though there is something to look forward to. I can actually rebuild my life. I have people who are here that are looking out for me, that want to assist me with that. I think that initially that's a big part of what is required, like that to not feel alone. And there are cliches that spring to mind, but I guess part of the reason that cliches become cliches is because there's a nugget of truth inside them. So this idea of where there is life, there is hope. Because insofar as we are here and we still have strength, um, we can do wonderful things for each other. I think one of the things that has been really inspiring to me across this week has been the intensity and immediacy of the regional response to my island. Like, it's been so inspiring.
Yes.
Um, and then within the nation, seeing the multiple instances of people being kinder to each other, extending themselves. I mean, volunteer efforts is what makes a disaster response run. There are people, the foot soldiers, the people on the ground, people who are making use of their vehicles to truck resources to other people, to deliver food, to deliver water, people who are working without pay, without even getting something to eat during the day, to make sure that other people who are less fortunate, less privileged than them can be at least a measure more comfortable. People who are doing things like, cooking hot meals and taking them to shelters that are nearby them. I think that those things are so crucial and help buffer people against the worst of what comes out of a disaster like this. That you make it clear that it's like, you're not going through this alone. You have people with you and supporting you.
For persons who suffer from anxiety, insomnia, depression, what would you say to those persons? Because I myself, I suffer from anxiety, not anxiety, sorry, insomnia, and I also suffer from depression. But
Mhm.
but holistically, what would you say to persons?
So for anxiety, one of the things that I find to be really, really helpful is mindfulness work. And there's a lot of different ways that you can engage in mindfulness. All that mindfulness is the act of being present in the moment, in the now. And if you're a very anxious person, what you get consumed with is dread associated with things that might happen or not knowing what is going to happen. Um, but you don't have power over things that might happen. The place that you actually have agency, the place that you have some power is in the now. And so it's essential to be able to come back to the present so that you can actually have proper perspective over your problems or the things that are bothering you. So a lot of the things that I would recommend rest on a foundation of mindfulness. And there's a lot of ways to become mindful. I think that when we start trying to cultivate some sort of stillness, we may realize that our minds are very busy, that we're constantly we're engaged in internal dialogue a lot. So the first thing, your first victory, if you are trying to become more mindful, is noticing that your mind is busy, noticing that you're distracted, and using something as an anchor to bring you back to the present. So a lot of really classic mindfulness and meditative work focuses on using your breath as an anchor, because you don't need anything to do it. You don't need any fancy equipment. It's not high tech at all. Just something as simple as noticing your breath moving in and out of your body and using that to cultivate a column of stillness. You need a center to return to. And when you can return to you and you notice yourself becoming flustered or worked up, taking that moment and being like, wait a minute, let me come back. And you take some breaths. You're like, okay, what is really happening here? What is going on with me? Why did I start feeling so worked up? What is it that's going through my mind? And breaking the problem down into pieces from that point, I think is really helpful. But there's other ways to do mindfulness work. Like you can do it by engaging with your senses in other ways. For people who are really anxious, I talk about things like showers and baths that, when you, let's say you're somebody who's anxious and also experiences insomnia. Your nighttime routine can really help support you being able to get a good night's rest. That if you can set up a set of actions that signal to your body, the day is over, we've done all that we can do, it's time to rest because I need rest in order to face the new day. You can do things that help support that idea. So, you start off at a certain time of the evening, turning down your lights. Maybe this is the time that you do things that have to do with hygiene and grooming. Like I said, you take a nice hot shower, you do like things like a moisturizing routine or a skincare routine. Those are all parts of like meditative and mindfulness work, like just focusing on yourself, focusing on caring for yourself as something that's necessary and important, and allowing yourself that space and time can really help you kind of like decompress and unwind from the stressors of the day. For some people, I see that there are people commenting in the chat that, their faith is important. So these are maybe times that you will engage in meditative work in the form of devotion. Prayer is meditative. Prayer is mindful, right? And if you're attempting to pray and you get distracted, just gently redirecting your mind back to the conversation that you're trying to have with whatever the higher power is that you communicate with. So these are all things that can help you kind of down regulate your systems, and kind of help you with that hyper arousal, that tightness, the hypervigilance that may be preventing you from sleeping and that may be informing your anxiety during the day, and just kind of gently winding yourself down toward bed. But there are things that you can do during the day too to kind of address anxiety moving through your day. I think a bit of breath work in the morning before you even get out of your bed, just kind of laying there on your back and noticing the breath, noticing how your body feels, just checking in with yourself. Did I sleep well last night or not? Am I feeling a little sluggish? Are there parts of me that are sore or still feeling tired? And taking that notion into your morning. Like, maybe I need a gentler start to my day today. Maybe I need to offer myself some grace, offer myself some compassion as I move through my day and not move as quickly as I normally would. So it's those little bits of kind of awareness of the self that I think can be so important.
But what about persons like me who at night, my mind does not shut off? So I'm talking about years. So what I've learned, I'm like, you know what? If I'm up and I can't sleep, I might as well use this time to my advantage. So I would just work. I would be up 2, 3, and my friends will know it. I'm talking about 4, 5, 6 in the morning. I'm up and I'm working. And then 7, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, I go to bed and I sleep for 4 or 5 hours and I'm good to go again. But it for over 10 years or so, I'm like this.
I mean, in your case, maybe it's just it's a very high functioning type of anxiety where, you know, you've learned to make the most out of it. But if it's a situation where, you know, you really would like to get more rest and you feel like you would like to manage things differently, that is something that a therapist can be helpful with. I think that would require like more of a conversation about like, okay, what is activating for you? What is the structure of your day like? What does your nighttime routine look like? What are the things that you get up and normally work on, and look at adjusting that. But there are some people who will say that, you know, that they're very anxious and very high functioning. That happens too.
I think having to deal with it for so many years, it became a norm. So my mornings go back to like maybe like 10 is when I will actually start the day, or sometimes it all depends on how soon I sleep. But it's not. I just accept it for what it is, and it's normal for me. I just make the most of it. But there are persons I know who will think, oh my God, I can't sleep. I'm anxious. I'm uneasy. You know, so I'm very, 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 very happy we're having this conversation. I see Alisa said those are some really good tips for meditation. You know, sometimes it's so much easier to say it, but to actually shift our minds, say, okay, you know what? I will adopt to this now. Let me practice this now. So thank you so much. Is there anything else you think we can touch base on?
I don't know. I mean, I think that in the midst of all this, anybody who's listening and is just thinking about, you know, preserving their wellness, and what are the things that they can do for themselves and what are the things that they can do for others. I've said this a couple of times today, but I think it's incredibly important at this time. Whatever that you can do that builds a sense of community in big ways and in small ways. So for yourself, if you're a person who sometimes hesitates around reaching out, around being a bit more open about what's going on with you, I'm not saying go tell your business to every and anybody, but you know, if you have people in your life who you feel as though are objective and who you can trust and who care about you, you know, allowing yourself the space to maybe be more candid with them than you usually are. You know, something as simple as a conversation could be incredibly helpful. And vice versa, if you have people in your life where you may have felt some concern about them, or maybe they've just been on your mind and you want to check in on them, do that. Don't talk yourself out of it. Go ahead and ask them how they are, and really ask, you know, making it clear that like you really want to hear like a true answer from them. Because some people don't have anybody asking them how they really are. And I think we said this a couple of times, and it even came up in the comments from people who are listening, the importance of us cultivating a kinder, more empathetic, more compassionate society. So as you move through your days going forward after watching this, you know, what can you do during the course of your day to interact with other people? How do you want to show up in the world? And do you want to show up in a way that emphasizes values of kindness, of compassion, of empathy? The world is a mirror. I mean, if you put those things out there, that's what the world is going to reflect back to you. If you put, you know, antipathy and meanness and underhandedness out there, then that's what the world's going to show back as well. So showing up with the energy that you'd like to receive, or the way you would like somebody who you love to be treated. I think that can be a helpful way to help people, be like, well, how do I want to act? Well, if this was your mother, if this was your child, if this were your family member, what would you want for them? And being guided accordingly, right?
So basically put yourself in that person's position.
Absolutely.
Put yourself in that person's position. My last question is this. I know you have to go. My last question is this. How do you calm the minds of Vincentians who are not in St. Vincent, but they're so heavy with everything that is happening there for their country, for their family and friends? How do you calm their minds?
Yeah, that's that's been really difficult for a few different people who I've seen people commenting about this on social media. And like I said at the top of our conversation, I actually feel like I'm doing better because I'm here, because I can directly reach out to people, check in on them, find out how they are. And not everybody who's away has that advantage. Some people are even trying to track down family members and having trouble doing so. So what I would say for people who already know kind of where their family is and they know how everyone is, but they want something to do, I think contributing to all of the donation efforts, not just acutely, but long range, because that's the part that I worry and wonder about, after this isn't, a sensational media event that happened within the last few days, months from now. Yeah. There are going to be people here who still need help, who still need people to champion them. And as somebody who is from here, you have a super important role to play in terms of that. So I've had people reaching out, asking me about things like, oh, I work with a business. We want to see how we can contribute to longer term efforts. So maybe bending that anxious energy toward things like that can be helpful. Also knowing that you don't just contribute by doing. I said this in the Twitter space that we did yesterday. You also contribute by being. So some people will feel a benefit just from knowing that they are being thought of, that when you reach out to someone indicating that you're thinking of them, that you're worried about them, that you're holding them in your head and in your heart, that lets them know that they haven't been forgotten. And that can be powerful. Like, don't underestimate the power that has for somebody to know that, like, oh, even like I'm going through all of this, but by no means am I alone. There are people who have me. They're holding me with them. They're holding space for me. So even if you feel like you don't have anything to give right now, you can bear witness. You can give your presence, and that's important as well.
Saying thank you to everyone. Thank you so much, Alisa. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I really hope that today would not be the first and the last time we do this. And as I mentioned earlier, I strongly believe this is a conversation we should have probably every 3 months. Even if we say the same thing, I think we just need to get
it bears repeating. It bears repeating.
Sorry?
No, I said it bears repeating. I don't think you can hear it
every so often. I believe it needs to happen every so often, because this is how I can assist in getting that information out there, to give that support. I may not be in another country. I may not see every person who's walking on the streets where I am, but utilizing this platform and bringing persons like yourself, persons like Zoya Hyman, persons like Tashina Thomas to the platform. They're all psychiatrists as well. And this is how we can constantly bring that knowledge and normalize the conversation. And in normalizing the conversation, it helps to eradicate the stigma.
Yeah.
So, and thank you so much. I see here someone commented. Monica said, you don't have to treat others the same way they treat you. We all can make a difference in someone's life. It's so much easier said than done for some persons. But Monica, I do agree with you. So Alisa, let me just if you don't mind, I will say 2 words to you before, so I can take you off from the live from the stream, and I'll meet you in the studio
Sure.
in a few minutes.
Sure.
So to our viewers, thank you so much again for tuning in to Gyhaffin with Keoma. I really and truly hope today's session was very, very effective for you, very essential, and that you find a certain level of necessity in the content. We do know the times we're living in. You know, we all say, "Oh, the times," right? But we do know what we're living in. We do know persons have been experiencing their own issues before COVID. Then we're in COVID, the pandemic, and now we're dealing with a regional crisis, which is a volcano. And so many persons are displaced because of this. And yes, even though we may not be in St. Vincent, so many of us are affected by this because we do know persons in St. Vincent, and at the same time, we are one Caribbean. So we see efforts right here in St. Martin from so many people. Caricope, the platform I'm streaming on from 7 to 1 News, he has been out. His home is overloaded with items. There are person who has been contacting me to say, hey, you know what, we have this, we want to ship these things out to St. Vincent. So thank you so much for this. So thank you for tuning in. And again, please make good use of this opportunity with the information, make good use of it, take advantage of it, and let's not make people a puppet. All right, people who you see walk the streets, they're not puppets. You don't have to take your camera out for everything you see. If you really care, you ask that person how they're doing. You don't have to ask certain questions. It's none of your business. If you want to really help, you can call a mental health professional. You can call a mental health foundation. There's so many ways how you can help, but recording someone and broadcasting it all over, it does no good for nobody. All right, and we have to also remember that persons have a family as well that care about them. So for us, it might just be like for some persons, just be, I have a content, I have this video, but people actually have families. All right, people have families that care about them. People have children, they have mothers, fathers, and we have to be mindful of that. So before you take your phone out, before you run your mouth about certain things, consider what that person is really going through. And also, there are so many persons who just appear to be so normal every single day, and they too are experiencing what you do not know about, we do not know of. So be kind, all right? Just be kind. Even if someone is unkind to us, let's try our best to be kind. I'm not saying to accept nonsense, but you know what I mean. So thank you all so much for tuning in every week. Thank you all. It's not for me. It's not always. I have to put the energy sometimes to get out, to get to do this, because I myself have my moments, all right? But I do believe how necessary it is to be here and to have these conversations. And again, thank you all so much. Caricope, thank you so much for being here. Henrietta, thank you for being here. My mother's namesake, Alisa, this was a really informative gap with Dr. Alvis. Thanks so much, ladies. Thank you all so much. And again, see you all next week. And if there are any topics you would like for us to cover, let us know, please. Just inbox me, send a message to Caricope, send me a message. Just inbox me, all right? Anything you think would be good for us to speak about, just let me know. Also, you all notice my environment has changed. I am at Asiana. Asiana is a restaurant and bar right there by Bobby's Marina in St. Martin. Right there in Bobby's Marina in St. Martin. And you can call Chin anytime. So Chin is accommodating me today. You see me drinking a lemonade and I have a cup of tea. So today, all of this is because of Asiana. All right. So thank you all so much and have a very good evening and a very great week. Bye, everyone.